My name is Chris Higgins. I work with the City of Vancouver. My role is as a green building planner. I'm involved with buildings single family up to 6-story, multifamily. So my role is residentially focused. Prior to working with the City of Vancouver, I worked for 7 years with a group called the Canada Green Building Council, and I worked to develop and launch and run a program called Lead for Homes, which dealt with single-family homes and multifamilies up to 4 stories. And then we also ran with the U.S. Green Building Council a program for multifamily up to and including 12 stories. And then before that, I worked with Mountain Equipment Co-op to build and develop new stores and a distribution center for Mountain Equipment Co-op. So yeah, this is what the majority of Vancouver looks like. Of course, single-family homes, kind of ground-oriented, multifamily, mixed-use buildings, along with relatively dense for 1 and 2 family homes with a suite. And the majority of the city, about 72% of the city, is covered by some sort of a single-family or duplex zone, and that is what we'll be talking about today. So I'm talking today about the process that the City of Vancouver has developed for 1 and 2 family homes. So I won't really be talking about our building code at all. I will be talking about our process, which is totally separate. It's not required along with the code. It's required as an intake requirement. So it is a separate piece. And I'll talk a little bit about how we develop the process. First, we set an overall goal, which we'll go into a little bit of detail on. We did a little bit of work to decide where to focus, where it was important to put our focus in terms of what building types. I'll talk a little bit about the development of the process, internally what we did. I'll go through what the process was, so our first iteration of the process, which was launched in 2008, and what our process is now. Sort of an improvement based on a process that worked well, but some changes we wanted to make. I'll go through some examples, and then I'll talk a little bit about how the process helps homeowners, builders, and the city. So first, the council set an overarching goal, sort of an aspirational goal to lead the world in green building design and construction, and set some 2020 targets. One was requiring all buildings constructed from 2020 onward to be carbon neutral in operations. And so in terms of my work, that's everything under residential under 6 stories. And also set a goal of reducing energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in existing buildings by 20% over 2000 levels. So even though I think both of these are sort of aspirational targets, they are really helpful in getting work done and getting either policy enacted or processes changed, because everyone understands that it's a will of council that we want to move towards lower energy buildings. So it's quite helpful to have that overarching piece. So today what I'm talking about, just to be clear, it applies to single family with or without a suite in the City of Vancouver, or a duplex semi-attached with or without suites. But it does not apply to townhome developments or multifamily apartments, 3 units or more. And in terms of why we chose to focus on 1 and 2 family homes, this is the new home or dwelling square footage. This is just residential we're looking at here. We're not including commercial. But the percentage of single family, and we regulate single family, laneway, and duplex all with the same requirements around energy modeling and blower door testing. If you add up single family, laneway, and duplex, you get 52% of all new square footage built in the City of Vancouver. And then if you were to add in as a separate piece row houses and low rise, so again those sort of wood framed, somewhat ground oriented buildings, you get 64% of the overall construction. So while towers and high rises get a lot of attention, the overwhelming majority of square footage in the City of Vancouver is wood framed, and certainly what we regulate with using EnerGuide comprises over half of all square footage built annually. So that's the reason why we chose to focus on single family, was it is such a large component of what gets built every year in the City of Vancouver. So how we developed the process, I'll go into that a little bit. We modeled a little over 300 homes to get a good baseline. We worked with the Greater Vancouver home builders and a local certified energy advisor outfit called E3 Eco Group to model 300 homes to get a baseline to kind of understand where we were in terms of energy efficiency and what some of the challenges might be or some of the opportunities might be. And then we put in place a required EnerGuide assessment before occupancy. So our first requirement was only that an EnerGuide assessment be done on each home before occupancy. So that was a great step. One of the challenges we found with it is a lot of builders were doing it at the very end, so they weren't using EnerGuide as a design tool or as a tool to improve the building, but they were just using it as a compliance piece. At that time, we required paper submissions and receiving a new home report in printed format to be submitted to the city prior to occupancy. And then 4 years later, we revised and expanded that process to require the CEA be engaged pre-permit. So when someone comes in for a permit, they actually have to have already engaged a CEA, and I'll go into that a little bit later. And then very recently, we set up electronic data access with Natural Resources Canada, and it's really an excellent tool because you get all the information about the homes that are planned or under construction in the city via a weekly data transfer, which is incredibly helpful. You can see all the detail right down to the heating system, the size of the building, who's building it, the different parties involved and what their choices have been, and it's been really helpful as a municipality to be able to have that data to understand what changes are taking place in the marketplace. So, for instance, we found out that last year, out of the new homes that were built, somewhere around 74 to 78% of new homes were going hydronic. So that was a real shift in the city. There used to be a lot more forced air, and there seems to be a real shift towards hydronically heated homes. And that was something we were able to see simply by doing a quick sort and audit of the EnerGuide data that we had. So it was really helpful to have that data. So in terms of developing the process, we looked at what the scores were from the houses that were being built. So we took 300 homes and modeled them. The light green peak there was the result, and so we found, okay, the average house is achieving about 76.2 in the City of Vancouver, and then we adjusted the code to look at the BC code. Again, this is a few years ago, but we adjusted to look at the BC code and found out it was about 74 if they were built to the BC code. And then we modeled, we worked with E3 Eco Group and Greater Vancouver Home Builders to adjust all of the homes in that data set to look at what would the effect of changes be. So what if we required high efficiency boilers, and what if they achieved 1.5 air changes, for example? How would that change the distribution of the scores? And then looking forward to a future code if we made some additional adjustments. So it's really helpful as a planning tool for the municipalities and seeing where we felt we could get in terms of energy efficiency performance. At the very least, just understanding where we were, and we had overestimated the level of performance because we thought at that time we were at EnerGuide 78, when in reality, the average was just at 76. So it was just helpful to really check performance and where we were at. So a little bit of history around certified energy advisors and the City of Vancouver. So they've worked with almost every 1- and 2-family home since 2009 in Vancouver, and well over 3,000 homes submitted reports on paper before we switched to the digital option. And the role initially was to create an energy model and a blower door test, and then the model and blower door test were submitted to the city. And that was the limit of the regulation at that time. And then after a number of years with that requirement, we changed the requirement and enhanced it a little bit. So certified energy advisors continue to work with every 1 and 2 family home, but now they also, in addition to creating an energy model and blower door test, they visually verify that the energy model meets or exceeds the VBBL. So one challenge we had in the past in terms of staff time was builders and developers were coming in with plans that didn't always meet the requirements of the code, and so then it took staff time. It took staff time to point out the issues, and then they would have to go make the corrections to their plans, and then return a separate for a separate visit. So there were sort of some staff time allocation challenges there. And by having a certified energy advisor check that the energy model and the plans meet or exceed the VBBL, we get a higher quality of application in. There's sort of this pre-screening that's been done. And the role now also completes a pre-drywall and a final visual verification. And I'll go through those in a little more detail. So the 3 kind of basic pieces that can be broken out, we've got the pre-building permit requirements, which I mentioned. So essentially that's the CEA checking to make sure the plans meet or exceed the VBBL, so the local code, and they submit a form that comes into our plan checkers, so they know that this has been done, and they include on there the P file or plan file number, so we know that the plan file or P file has been submitted to their service organization, which will then submit it to EnerGuide, so we'll be able to see it in a few days, and we're also able to see that the individual coming in has hired a licensee CEA, because we can see the certified energy advisor number on there along with their service organization number. Also, in terms of the next piece is prior to the installation inspection, and one piece of feedback we had internally was around from our inspections group and the amount of time they have or don't have, and where their sort of focus is. And if we wanted to focus more greatly on energy efficiency, we wanted to trying to make their jobs either no more difficult or a little bit easier. So we have the CEA performs a pre-drywall verification where they go through and complete a thermal bypass checklist and submit that thermal bypass checklist to the city and leave a copy of it on site. So when the inspector, when he or she arrives on the site, they're able to see that the thermal bypass checklist has been completed and that step has been done. So they can re-verify it if they want, but they know it has been done. So energy efficiency has been considered. And then prior to the final inspection, the requirement is unchanged from the previous requirement. Essentially, the end file is submitted, although historically it was printed, and now it'll be submitted electronically. So those are sort of the 3 major steps in 1 and 2 family. This is an example of what the pre-permit CEA form, an abbreviated version of it, looks like, indicating that the P file aligns with the Vancouver building bylaw. And so essentially it's saying, yeah, so you've got attic insulation that's R50, great, so that meets the requirement. You've got a wall insulation that is R22 effective, that meets the requirement. You've got domestic hot water, which meets the requirement, meets or exceeds the requirement of 78. Your heating equipment efficiency of 95 exceeds our requirement of 92, and the U value of windows of 1.4 meets our requirement, and the predicted air changes of 3 air changes per hour exceeds our requirement of 3.5, and then it gives a predicted EnerGuide score. So having that information up front is certainly helpful for intake staff and reduces the time they have to spend plan checking and reviewing a project. And then I touched on the thermal bypass checklist. So prior to the installation inspection being booked, the CEA will visually verify the schedule of windows, that the wall insulation meets the code requirement. They'll complete a modified thermal bypass checklist, and they'll do a pre-drywall blower door test. And then the CEA submits those completed forms Form 2 inspections. And if an inspector shows up on site and the form's not there, then it's an automatic failure for that inspection, and the inspector will have to come back another day when the form is present. So sort of a check there. And again, step 3 is unchanged. So this is prior to the final inspection. The end file needs to be submitted, and the city needs to receive it. Historically, it was a printed version, but now it will be electronic. And there's some real advantages for the city in terms of the 1 and 2 family process. It really communicates early to the project team the importance of energy efficiency and that this is a focus for the city. The city is looking at this and considering this. And it provides the home buyer a relative understanding of the energy efficiency of the house they're buying. What we've seen is of houses that go for sale, if the score that the project receives exceeds what the code intends. So if you're getting a score of 80 or above, generally, the builder will disclose it. And we certainly have some builders that use it on not only in their sales material, but also on their website. We have a couple of builders that have achieved a number of homes in the mid 80s, which is great. And so they're certainly quite proud of that. And it really helps those leading home builders stand out, and at the same time, home builders get a relative understanding of energy efficiency, the energy efficiency of the house they're buying. So setting aside those 3 kind of great pieces, it's been a really rich source of data for the City of Vancouver. We can look at, for instance, and isolate the bottom 10% of single-family homes and try to understand what those homes have in common, why we're still seeing some homes that achieve in the 60s. What is it those homes are doing? So they're complying with our prescriptive code, but what are those homes doing that's different? Are they incredibly large? Do they have a ton of glass to the north? What is the issue? So it's been really a rich source of data in terms of understanding what's getting built by who and where improvements can be made. And we're able to determine, and there's certainly other ways to do this, but we're able to determine quite quickly that, 80% of the single-family homes built in the city are built by these 60 builders. Of those builders, here are the builders that are building, the top 50%, and here's the builders that are building the bottom 50%. So if we want to focus on improvement and sort of bringing up the bottom, it gives us really clear direction on how we can focus. So that's been really quite helpful. So I'll touch very briefly on the major process pieces. So again, a certified energy advisor is on every project team, which has been really, really helpful. There's a pre-permit checklist required, along with the P-file being created and submitted, pre-installation checklist, and visual verification, and then a final inspection. And with the requirement to engage a certified energy advisor pre-permit, we've heard from a number of architects that they're really liking the new process, specifically because historically, when we required the CEA only to produce a report at the very end, often the architect or designer was never engaged. And now, requiring it up front, the architect or designer sees opportunities to improve the energy efficiency of the house at really modest cost. So that's been one really big piece of feedback around the revised process that has worked really well. I'll touch very briefly on rezoning. So the City of Vancouver uses rezoning as a tool to get higher energy and green building outcomes, specifically for townhouses or small multifamily buildings. They must meet EnerGuide 84 or better, and we'll certainly update that with the forthcoming changes to EnerGuide, along with either LEED candidate for Homes Gold or Passive House Certified, or in the case of townhouses, we also recognize Built Green. So those are all options, and obviously if you're pursuing LEED candidate for Homes Gold or Built Green, then EnerGuide 84 is required, and then if you're pursuing Passive House, then you just have to pursue Passive House certification. So we're really trying to reuse rezoning as a tool to make it easier to update the code in the future. So we've communicated this publicly with using this slide, which you can see our Vancouver Building Bylaw in 2008, 2013, 2015, and future updates in 2018 and 2020, and how the rezoning policy aligns. So right now our 2014 rezoning policy roughly aligns with about a 50% improvement over our 2015-2016 Vancouver Building Bylaw. So it really provides an opportunity for rezone projects to forge the way to lower energy use for future code updates. And then also in there is the higher buildings policy for tall buildings. So those would be high rises over 550 feet in height. And they have to actually meet our 2020 Vancouver Building Bylaw. And then there's some pieces in there about the renewable and district heating and hot water system, which doesn't apply to the majority of the buildings that I'm involved with, but it is mentioned there as one of the ways we're looking to green the energy use. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're really using the rezoning policies to foster innovation and build capacity, so people understand what it takes to build a more airtight multifamily building, or what it takes to build a better insulated townhouse project, or those kind of pieces. Sort of a way to test the waters. The city is really trying to focus on the envelope, and working with certified energy advisors has really helped with that. They're able to give feedback on envelope improvements and inexpensive opportunities to improve the envelope. We're pursuing an envelope-focused approach because it's reliable and resilient in terms of energy performance, gives the biggest comfort gains, really maximizes local jobs and manufacturing, which aligns with some other green jobs goals we have, and provides a decreased cost of ownership, mortgage and utilities over the life of the house. And we've had some challenges with complex mechanical systems, so envelopes certainly lead to mechanical systems that can be simpler. So that's the reason why we're focusing on the envelope. And again, one final time, I'll just review the process. Again, it's not part of our Vancouver Building Bylaw, but we have a pre-building permit requirement, which if I was to take out one piece that's the most helpful, it's this pre-building permit requirement that you engage a CEA at that stage, and the CEA does an assessment of the builder's plans or the architect's plans. And that early stage assessment is the kind of one piece that has the greatest amount of impact. The prior to installation inspection is important, but we have it largely in there because we have a 3.5 air changes requirement, and so we really want to help builders hit that requirement. Prior to the pre-installation inspection is important, but the pre-building permit requirement is the most important. And then at the end, receiving a copy of the completed home file is also key. So if people wanted to pick out sort of some of the low-hanging fruit and some of the less costly pieces, then certainly it would be the pre-building permit requirement and then receiving the file prior to the final inspection. So that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.